In this episode, I interview Chris Tompkins, who is a de facto expert on all things SCORM related. Now, why do you need to know about SCORM? Well, even if you don't publish anything yourself, let's say you have a technical team for that, knowing about the technology that's going to be used to wrap up your package will help you create a better e-learning package and ultimately give you the data you need to enhance the learning impact that it actually has. Now, the goal of this conversation was threefold. Figure out what can actually be measured, figure out how to bake that into the design process, and then what to use when you are actually publishing into an LMS based on your vision, your goals, and what you're trying to accomplish. So, enjoy!
You're here because you want more engagement, more delight, more fun, more learning. You're hungry for change and willing to take action.
If you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never come up with anything original.
Welcome to the e-learning scenario design podcast with Anna Sabramowitz.
I'm gonna show you how great I am.
Let's take learning to the next level.
Hello, everybody. This is Anna Sabramowitz, and today I'm talking to Chris, and I think the best way for us to get to know Chris is for Chris to tell us who he is, what he does, and basically the driving force behind his life.
Thanks. So yeah, I'm Chris Tompkins. I work at Rustici Software. I'm a director of sales, and I've been spending many years now helping e-learning providers play nicely with one another. We have deep expertise in things like SCORM, AICC, XAPI, you might have heard it called 10CAN, and we spend all day helping tools like Adobe's Captivate, Articulate Storyline, build courses and save them out. We help learning management systems like Blackboard, Instructure's Canvas and Bridge, Desire to Learn, Paycom, Workday, and hundreds of others properly bring those courses into their environment, play and track them the way they should. And we have a lot of solutions for everybody in between. We're small. We're in Nashville, Tennessee. There's about 30 of us here, but we're supporting the e-learning industry across the world all at the same time. So instructional designers, people building content can save it so it plays and tracks the same way in many of the environments that the end learners probably live in.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah, it's a neat little niche that we serve really well.
Yes, and if you want to see how much fun these guys have at work, because from past conversations, I've heard a SCORM isn't that exciting. Then check out their website because it's pretty awesome. It's very warm. I like it. You humanize the software aspect. That's awesome. Okay, so I just wanted to give everybody, because I think we have a gamut of people who subscribe to this channel, and some of them are just like hot off the press. Some of them are people who maybe have been training for like years and years, and all of a sudden their company has moved to this new platform, or they have this new mandate to make things online accessible, and they're getting into this world with all these things in the background that they now have to think about. So I think what you can do for us is add the perspective of what are some things that a novice and even an expert should be considering when they're publishing their e-learning, or when they're thinking about the intent that they want to achieve. So maybe first let's talk about what all these things mean, and where do they come from, and why did you make them? Right.
So when I go and attend e-learning events, often SCORM, AICC, XAPI become buzzwords. The nice thing, really, they all come from the same design, and that's to help somebody publish an e-learning experience so that it plays the same way, babysits the learner the same way in a variety of different learning applications. I'll probably call them all an LMS going forward because that's simple for me, but I've heard them called learning management systems and talent development systems and a whole wide range of things. Yeah. To me, it's a platform that manages learners, gives them a username and a password, can manage content, assign it to the right person, play it, and show some reports on the other side. And we can certainly argue about the pedagogical approach of learning and the right way to help somebody learn. But those things aside, you've got to be able to make it portable and move between things. So the oldest and most well-worn path is called SCORM, the Shareable Content Object Reference Model.
Nobody has to memorize that, by the way.
Never. I think I'm probably the only person that's going to say those words out.
Yeah, you
today.
are.
So essentially, at the end of the day, SCORM helps this in a very fundamental way. So I'm actually not smart enough to explain it at the abstract level. And instead, if we just look at how does this actually work? What's a real world tangible story? So if you imagine that you are a mechanic in the Army, which is where all of these standards began, you were faced with a unique challenge 15 years ago. The military at large, the Department of Defense, is launching more e-learning courses in a day than most corporations launch in an entire year. It is profound. And 15 years ago, they found themselves in a weird situation where a mechanic would have to go to all of these different unrelated websites to train on different topics. So to keep our example easy, a mechanic needs to repair Jeeps, Humvees, and tanks in order to know how to do their job. So back in the day, you'd have jeeptraining.com set up by Chrysler, who owns the Jeep. You'd have AM General set up the Humvee training portal, and you'd have whoever builds tanks set up tanktraining.com. And that's all well and good. The learner could log into this portal with an individual name and password at any time. They could train where the first module is how to change a flat tire, and the most advanced ones how to swap out the engine. But they would then exit and have to go to an entirely different platform in order to learn the next vehicle, and on we go. When we start to look at that soldier's entire training catalog, it's massive. And so when a general, let's call him their boss, needs to deploy a mechanic who's an expert in Jeeps, Humvees, and tanks, well, they were having to go into 3 different portals, download reports, try to munge them together in a way that this one calls it Chris completed a course, this one calls it Chris finished a course. The data and reporting was really hard. And so the DoD at large said, no more, we're not going to do this. And instead, we're going to fund this group called ADL, Advanced Distributive Learning. Their website is adlnet.gov if you're interested in learning more about them. And they are essentially a taxpayer-supported think tank that ultimately solves these type of interoperability problems, because it's really hard to bring the entire e-learning industry together at once and say, what do you guys want to do? So ADL then mandates these things. They cooked up SCORM. And at the end of the day, SCORM is an open standard. Anybody in the world can go to adlnet.gov, download the phone book size stack of paper to learn how to develop it. There are rules of the road there, essentially, that we can all benefit from. So if we fast forward to today, the Army has one learning management system to rule them all. And on day 1 of your career in the Army, you are placed into that portal, and you can do whatever you want to do so long as you are taking it in that learning management system. So all of these subject matter experts, Jeep training, Humvee training, tank training, can build whatever they want so long as the deliverable to the federal government is a SCORM zip file. And this allows us to then have a learning management system and have many different content providers all feeding the same platform. That structure has made its way around the world in every vertical I can think of: private organizations, NGOs, nonprofits, government bodies, regulatory agencies. I've worked with a wide variety of different clients who need that type of interoperability to suit their learning and training goals. So SCORM has evolved over the years. If somebody casually comes to me and says, hey, I'm working with SCORM, I assume that they're probably talking about SCORM 1.2. Inside of our SCORM Cloud, we support all types of different content, but anywhere on a month from 70 to 80% of all of the new content we see uploaded to the platform is SCORM 1.2. It does the basics really well. It bundles a course up so that it's portable and can play the same way everywhere, and it babysits the learner with the big 4. It's a concept I use a lot. I totally just made it up, but it's total time, completion status, pass-fail status, and score. And whether I'm giving you a knowledge check in the hallway, an old school Scantron sheet, a modern e-learning course, or a paper quiz, I've got to know, are you still working on it or are you done? Did you pass or did you fail? What was your score? And if I took 2 hours and it took 2 minutes, well, that's certainly interesting too. And so SCORM 1.2 does those things really, really well. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, it totally does. Yeah. I'm hoping it makes sense to everybody else who's listening too. So one of the things I'm wondering then is the SCORM capability as far as this packaging it. Do you have to have special software? Like, can you wrap up? What can you actually wrap up in SCORM? That makes
That's
sense.
a great question. Yeah, so the anatomy of a SCORM course, I think, is the best way to talk about that concept. And at its core, a SCORM package is a zip file. It's the same archive you've used everywhere else, but everything inside it is organized in a really strategic and prescriptive way. So SCORM can be any web deliverable multimedia that will run in an active modern web browser session. So if you're using images, that's great. Video is fine. Interactivity, Flash back in the day was a big part of a SCORM course. HTML5 is starting to replace that, and it works fine with SCORM. So as you think about what could I do with learning experiences, anything that's in a web browser is probably fine. A bunch of asterisks around it. We can also do some things that aren't in a web browser, but it gets a little rocky and a little more difficult to begin to plan out how that works. But generally speaking, you will see a slide-based nature to a SCORM course. It'll have a beginning, a middle, an end, and likely an assessment. That's very common. And SCORM does it all really, really well. As you begin to build on the type of concepts in that course, that's where the differentiation between the versions of SCORM. There's a more advanced version called SCORM 2004, which on its own is an incomplete statement because SCORM 2004 comes in 3 different editions, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, all which fundamentally hate one another and has no backwards compatibility with SCORM 1.2. So SCORM 2004 provides what I call sequencing and navigation. It is a choose your own adventure style to learning that is really reminiscent of these paperback novels I read as a kid, where if you want to go into the cave, turn to page 23, but if the road looks safer, go to page 95. It gives the learner the ability to pick a path, even though the content creator had to lay out all of those options.
Yeah.
SCORM 2004 can do some more pedantic things. It has larger interactions, data stores, and some other technical issues. But my guidance as a guy who knows a little more than most about SCORM is stick to SCORM 1.2 unless you're trying to leverage the value of SCORM 2004 for a specific reason.
Okay.
And the biggest reason that I say that is that the whole goal of these standards is around interoperability. So anytime you're trying to get software around the world across many different businesses to play nicely together, interoperability becomes the core of that different type of strategy. And often the latest and greatest isn't the right fit when we think about trying to get people to play along. So an easy example of this, the MP3 is remarkable to me in a few different ways. First, it's the only piece of software on my modern iPhone X that I carry around every day that I bothered to put on every other phone I've ever had. It was on all of my iPods and my iPod Shuffle, and I had a Zune. I was super proud of it. And these little MP3s have made their way off Napster in the early 90s into my phone now. And I don't think there's any other piece of software that has stuck with me as long as the MP3 has. And it's because the MP3 is a package that can move between devices very easily. When you hit the triangle button, it plays the same way every time. And some basic data comes out of that package, artist name, song title, and it doesn't have to be fancier than that. If the MP3 standard was changing fundamentally every year, year after year, you wouldn't be able to use that file in as many places as you can. I rented a car not long ago, and it had a thumb drive that you could just shove in and play an MP3. That's a big deal. And so SCORM 1.2 is that for the e-learning industry. It is the one and rare time where when you're imagining what type of software will best suit your learning program, it might not be the latest and greatest. If the name of the game is interoperability, the standard that is old, stable, and used everywhere is the most common. There's some large open source learning management systems. Moodle comes to mind. Moodle supports the basics of SCORM 1.2 really well. If you want to do advanced SCORM 2004, if you want to do XAPI inside Moodle, it's a lot of work. And if you just use the latest and greatest standard for the sake of doing it as an instructional designer, you've potentially saved your file down in a format that won't work with your clients in a way that SCORM 1.2 would have let you leap over all of those hurdles without any additional effort. And so just be sure as you reach into the toolbox that you're grabbing the right tool for the job. I'm a car guy, and I like to wrench on cars for fun. And I could easily, to a layman, say a screwdriver, a socket, and a wrench all do the exact same thing. They all turn a threaded bolt. But in reality, when you find yourself in those situations, one tool is far more useful than the other. And I care very little about which one's newest, which one's shiniest, which one I'm most proud of. Let's just grab the tool that does the job that we need it to do, and let's move on. Because these interoperability standards aren't the thing that really differentiates something from another thing. It is the features and the functionality and the interoperability that really differentiate which one you grab out of the toolbox, the situation you're in, and how it's designed for it.
I love that. I love that approach, because they say if you have a hammer, then everything looks like a nail, and then that gets you in trouble.
Yeah. XAPI is something I'm super happy about. We helped to write it. The 0.95 version is 100% of Rustici Software's work. And we spent 4 or 5 years researching, talking to the industry, crafting this thing for ADL, who we've turned that research over. We called it Project Tin Can at the beginning because it was a two-way communication between the e-learning industry and the standards body. It's turned into the Experience API, also known as XAPI, in its more mature stage. It turns out that cans and strings and tree houses is a uniquely American concept. And when we put that out to the global population, people went, "What? I don't understand what you're doing."
Oh, that's so funny.
You didn't know either. So the Training and Learning Architecture Experience API, the TLA XAPI, is what the Department of Defense is calling the 1.0 version of this big effort. So if you hear Tin Can and you hear XAPI, they are somewhat interchangeable there.
Okay.
But ultimately, it is a tool in the toolbox for stepping outside of what SCORM can do. So if you imagine a nurse taking continuing education credits to maintain their certification for CPR, they probably log into their hospital's LMS, they sit in front of a computer screen, and they take a feeling like a PowerPoint thing with a quiz at the end. SCORM does that really well. And SCORM helps that CPR course designer deploy it globally, and it just works, and everybody can track it in their system. Sure, XAPI can do that, but you're creating new work. You are creating a package that might not be supported in every learning management system throughout the world. And so you need to be sure that there's reasons, compelling reasons to go do that type of effort. XAPI is most valuable in the second step of that nurse's training, where we go, sure, you spent 63 of the required 60 minutes in that course, you passed it with a score of 95, but show me you know how to do CPR. Mm-hmm. And we make them practice on the Rustici and dummy, where you do chest compressions and breathing on that apparatus. And most hospitals today come up a little short of, I think, an ideal situation. They print out a paper certificate, they hand it to the nurse, and it has their name on it, and you completed CPR on this date with this trainer. Ta-da! Yeah. And so I don't think that's the best way to track that. And so XAPI is designed to create a noun, a verb, and an object. Chris likes this. Chris posted a picture. Anna wrote on a wall. It's the same data model behind Facebook. And it allows us to be more expressive about the things that are happening outside of a web browser experience. Mm-hmm. We could say things like, Chris revived the dummy. Chris used this volume of breath, this forcefulness of chest compression. The XAPI standard can even have attachments where you could print out the PDF certificate and attach it to that statement and move it between different databases known as an XAPI Learning Record Store, or LRS. The last step of that nurse's journey, and I think this is the part that is actually really exciting, is that hospitals track the nurse's interactions on live patients all the time. Mm-hmm. And so to be able to take whatever application is the source of truth for that hospital, a billing application, a patient interaction portal, triaging systems, I'm a little ignorant when it comes to exactly
These all sound really good, yes.
we could use XAPI to be a light touch. Instead of having all this double data entry into the LMS, it could say, today, Chris revived a patient. And when you start putting real world job performance, live hands-on training, and traditional e-learning data in the same database, the learning record store, and having them in the same context, noun, verb, and object, gives us the magic moment to say, ooh, this particular nurse is 30% more effective at actually saving lives. Why is that? Show us the training and learning experiences that differentiate your top performer from the rest of your population. Is it they are the only ones that took the additional optional CPR course that taught some new-fangled hippie skill that no one knew about? Are they the only ones that pushed down hard enough on the dummy to break ribs but save lives? Are they working a different cohort or a different shift or a different time of day or with a different coworker? Organizations can't possibly know the efficacy of their learning and training program unless they measure outcomes. Yeah. And so XAPI is that thread that ties together traditional learning and real world outcomes. And there are a lot of systems that we enable around the world that can just translate a SCORM course into XAPI. And so maybe for an instructional designer, you should just keep using SCORM for now. But understand that grabbing the right tool for the right job is important, because if everybody tomorrow just switched to using XAPI, I think you'll find that many learning management systems aren't quite ready to play and track that package in the way that SCORM really works well for them today. And so finding that right fit for the right job is important, because if you're just going to continue to learn in a modern web browser, please use SCORM. But if you have a customer that has all three of those things mingling together, there's a lot of value there that might be worth the extra effort.
Wow. I'm thinking right now just the application of just XAPI, how a lot of companies are really trying to leverage that 70-20-10 model of learning. And it seems like this would be, if your organization is actually committed to that and has structures in place that are working, like the mentorship and things like that, then this would be the move, because it would string all those things together. It
will. The easiest way to start to capture what's actually happening, there are full-featured learning record stores out there like Watershed LRS. Mike Rustici of our company's namesake left Rustici Software to go manage Watershed. It was a startup here inside of our company, and now they are a sister. And so they are providing that type of value. The challenge I think you'll find is that when you start tracking that much data, being able to manage it, warehouse it, report on it, solve interoperability problems begins to compound itself. And so my caution there is go into those projects with an end in mind. Don't try to track everything. Instead, say, this year, we want to be able to see this pie chart. Okay. And if I understand the pie chart you're trying to build, we can then argue about the ingredients necessary and the order of operations to cook it up. And if you go into it in that approach, I think it works really well. I've seen a lot of people step up and start tracking everything and then really struggle to understand what's in the stew.
It's kind of funny because the way that you design good scenarios, branching scenarios, is you never start with the start and then just branch out with the infinite possibilities. The way to do it is to always figure out what your pie chart is going to be, basically your outcome, and all that need to happen to get there. That's totally awesome. Backwards design rocks. It
has to happen in order for XAPI to be successful.
Most people get in touch with me with questions saying, how do I manage all the branches? And I'm thinking, oh man, okay, that's getting lost in the weeds, right? Because now the possibilities are endless. So I totally get that. That's really cool. So, and I think, it's kind of neat because I was thinking about, there's this platform I was working with for an NGO. It was called Kaya. It's a humanitarian academy, humanitarian initiative academy. Anyways, kaya.org. But what they do is it's awesome that it's almost like SCORM has allowed for a lot of good things to happen that way, because they're able to leverage these little SCORM pieces from the entire world, because humanitarian efforts are, they happen everywhere and everybody's building training. So now you're able to kind of pull from this huge pool of all these resources and actually create learning streams for people, because everything talks to everything else. It's so cool, actually.
Yeah.
You're like saving lives.
We try. We're also putting people through a lot of compliance training, so SCORM has a lot of spectrum, and it has a lot of exciting things that it can do in the future. But tactically, for instructional designers, often your biggest interaction is just at the end of building it in Adobe's Captivate, Articulate Storyline, Trivantis's Lectora, Domino's Claro, Camtasia. There are hundreds of authoring tools out there. And at the end, you can say, save as SCORM. Specifically, same as SCORM 1.2, SCORM 2004, 3rd or 4th edition, AICC, TinCan, XAPI. And understanding what's in that drop-down menu becomes really valuable for the day-to-day operations. The big picture is certainly something to keep in mind, but often that exporting function or that publishing function is the thing that is your product at the end of the day, that can go to different learning management systems, different organizations, and have an impact. And so I think understanding that full picture is really where instructional designers begin to realize the value of these standards and understand the right and the wrong time to pull the tool out of the toolbox.
Yeah. And what's really cool, I think everybody will be excited about this. I'm going to go into my Articulate Rise courses and show the export screen and have Chris basically walk me through what all of those little options mean, so I can make better decisions.
Let's do that.
But do you want to do that first, or do you want to? We actually had some people send in questions. What do you think?
Okay. Yeah, either way. Let's.
Okay, cool. Let me get to those questions. And the first one is from Zoa. And what aspects and to what depth of knowledge of these standardization tools are beneficial for a designer to know? This is to assume that the designer is not also the e-developer, in which case I'd say they probably need to know more. However, I strictly do the designing. So this person is coming to it from that end, that they hand off this technical aspect. So they do the storyboarding, script writing, content analysis, and scoping, and learning theory. So what do you think?
So I think your biggest challenge will be fitting it into what SCORM 1.2's expectations are.
Ooh, okay.
And so as you begin to storyboard and things, I think trying to design a course that will work in the most possible places is the first big thing to consider. If you want to do more advanced things, I think that's great, but we then need to ask questions like, can this learning management system handle SCORM 2004? So from the concept of designing, storyboarding, script writing, it's the difference between a linear course, beginning, middle, end, slide-based in nature. A typical SCORM 1.2 course will have slides where here's your intro, how long it's going to take, who built it, what your expectations are. Slide 2 is typically table of contents and where we're going to go. Slide 3 then can embed a video, embed a piece of interactivity, have some things on the screen. It's like a really interactive and compelling version of a PowerPoint presentation.
I love how you said that and you were like meant it.
Yeah, it's true. And the advantage there, though, is that in between slides, SCORM is dropping a bookmark so that if your learner loses their internet connection or has to stop right here, if you put a 4-hour video on that slide, that might not be as compelling as cutting that video into 10 slides so that if they make it through some things, you could have some knowledge checks in between that remind them of the 4 key concepts they learned in the last 20 minutes that they launched it, and then start the next section of video. But moreover, from a workflow standpoint, if I were to leave and come back, I at least get put back where I left off.
Yeah.
Not all video players can handle bookmarking within the video itself. And so cutting it up into smaller chunks helps you help your learners come and go as they please, stay engaged, and reinforce different key concepts.
So, okay, so just to say what you're kind of reiterate what you're saying there, or maybe that I understand it correctly. If somebody is wanting a course or planning a storyboard, they have to think about these each slide almost like as a discrete moment that SCORM is going to tap into. So you're saying make those maybe pieces more meaningful or smaller?
That's right.
Okay.
Smaller always helps with the bookmarking if that's the concern we're trying to design against. And it also helps make it more interactive. Anytime that they're clicking and being engaged with the course, it's my opinion that at least they're not, staring at the ceiling and just watching a video go by.
Okay.
Often you'll see at the bottom of the screen in the SCORM course a slider that's showing the progress and where the key moments are. That's a SCORMy thing that you'll often run into. Those type of features help. And from a storyboarding perspective, from a design perspective, understanding what SCORM is expecting will prevent you from architecting this grand thing and then go, oh, SCORM hates this. Like I can't launch an executable file from here and track some things. Keeping it in a web browser experience, multimedia that works well in a browser, and then chunking it up so that bookmarking works as it should is really powerful. I think the other important piece is understanding what SCORM can track with respect to assessments. SCORM provides the ability to do multiple choice, multiple select, to have fill in the blank, to have almost essays. There's some character limits. I don't know them off the top of my head, but like 50,000 characters per answer.
Oh, for goodness sakes.
Is important. SCORM 2004 does more if you need them. But that type of interactivity, SCORM can help you assign a weight so that not all questions are worth the same. Out of a 10-question multiple choice test, maybe you don't want to design it where they are all worth 10%. SCORM can handle those type of things. And SCORM can also help the educator understand the individual answers to each question and whether they were right or wrong, often called an all interactions report.
Okay.
And so if you were to want to grab more data, it is possible to trick SCORM into capturing first name, last name, pet's name, favorite color, and weight those as a 0 value, and then have a quiz at the end that is actually an assessment. So those are the tools in the toolbox as you begin to design to consider those things.
Awesome.
If you start designing a non-linear path where everything's normal, but at slide 3, you let them pick different learning objects or have a pre-test or a post-test and bring it back together, that's where SCORM 2004 comes into play. And if you want to do those type of things, that's great. Let's look at the LMS before you go too far down that road to ensure that it's going to be able to play and track that the way that you want. And there's some subtle differences between SCORM 2004 3rd and 4th edition and what the LMS is going to expect. And I can help cheat our way around a lot of those problems should you run into them down the road. But understand that you might be creating work that just isn't reasonable for a customer using Moodle or something more simple.
So it sounds like what you're doing is you're almost balancing the experience you want your learner to have, like how self-directed almost you want it to be, but then you're maybe trying to be also realistic with the kind of data you're going to be able to pull as far as results.
That's right.
Okay.
So SCORM has some limitations. I don't think that they're overly burdensome, but in the way that you're designing things to meet the spirit of that question, understanding that SCORM is expecting this linear progression, it's going to be slide-based. Those are the rules of the road. And you should build something, you should storyboard on a slide-based nature, essentially, as you begin to design what you want this thing to be. Knowing that the e-learning developer who's going to be using these tools on your behalf is going to be designing your storyboards and putting your materials into that similar format.
Okay, cool. Okay, so next question. When we think about standardization of authoring tools, how do you think marketing plays into that? We all know the name brands: Storyline, Articulate, Captivate, Blackboard, Desire to Learn. Do you think there are dangers in the branding aspects and the growth of how e-developers or e-learning designers might purchase or use the current standards?
Yeah. So all the names you just rattled off there are Rustici Software customers in one way or another. And so they are all my babies, and I love them all equally. At the end of the day, marketing and features and functionality are very important. I think they help you understand what these tools are capable of, help you design the right e-learning experience and then go find the right tool. And I think you see these stratifications in many other areas with respect to interoperability, which is the only thing I know anything about. There are plenty of photo editing programs out in the world. Adobe's Photoshop is by far the premier, and you can almost go to college to learn how to use every button in Photoshop. But I can get Instagram on my phone and take a picture of my food and turn it brown and make it a square, and they both save as a JPG at the end, or a PNG, or whatever the file format might be. So when you think about what you want to do, understanding the tools that they have, understanding how they position themselves, how they license themselves, how they end up positioning themselves relative to ease of use and functionality. Photoshop is really, really impressive. But to somebody who just needs to crop a picture and remove red eye, Photoshop can make that far harder than what comes standard with a lot of digital cameras. Yeah. And so when I think about some of the products that you just listed there, the cool thing about it is that at the end of the day, the question you should ask is, do you support SCORM? Can I have a SCORM 1.2 sample from your thing and test it in a neutral sandbox, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. But that becomes the baseline. SCORM is the output of all of those tools, or the input. So Articulate and Captivate, two of the industry-leading authoring tools that you just mentioned, they both save as SCORM. And I'm intimately familiar with what comes out of those tools, because both of them are running our SCORM driver behind the scenes to do the technical heavy lifting, to bundle that project up as a SCORM course so that it plays the same way and tracks the learner the same way with respect to the Big Four. Blackboard, Desire to Learn, two customers running the exact same SCORM player behind the scenes. And that's a value add to both of those categories. When I talk to those type of vendors, hey, do you want your authoring tool to save as SCORM differently than everybody? Do you want your stuff to play differently in somebody's LMS like everybody else? Then it's probably advantageous to license the same tool to save as SCORM as your competitors. And that's the same argument that we can use with a learning management system. The big learning management system players don't want their player to handle SCORM content differently than their competitors. There's real value to having these things save the same way and having these things play and track the same way. And that's what Rustici Software kind of does for the industry at the end of the day. So buy into whatever marketing you need, find the right tool for the job, find the one that I think is most important, you're comfortable using. No one wants a really fancy tool with tons of options around the side that gets lost and cluttered. They're intentionally marketing their message to attract a certain type of user. And if you feel like they're speaking to you, that's great. Know that you can always save as SCORM, and more importantly, you can always switch tools, because at the end of the day, if all of your files are a SCORM package, your library is pretty dynamic.
Awesome. So is there, usually if I'm working as a, let's say, an instructional designer, and there's an LMS that the company that I'm moving my things into, do they should tell me what works best with theirs, right?
Yeah, you need to understand what that LMS is. You need to understand, with respect to e-learning standards, what do you support? Is it SCORM 1.2? Is it nothing? That's also an option. And there are plenty of great learning platforms that don't support standards at all. I often see these where they have their own bespoke authoring environment. And so you'll be designing and building inside of the tool that's delivering, and that might not be bad. I talk people out of using SCORM all the time. SCORM is the thing that would allow you to switch between authoring tools, grab content off the shelf, switch between instructional designers, and always have these little files that can move into your learning management system. But if you're in an environment that doesn't support standards at all, that's probably fine. The disadvantages there are you might get locked in. So if you ever decide to switch down the road, your stuff's bespoke. It doesn't play nicely anywhere else, and you're going to have some switching pain. You won't be able to pick from the pool of existing resources, off-the-shelf content to bring into that environment. It will be bespoke. But that's not bad for every group. And there are certainly plenty of arguments to make for not using standards. And candidly, I'm the right guy to talk you through those things.
What comes to mind for me is like Teachable, where they have their own course development, but there is no way support all that stuff. Yeah, it's a little different. It is like, I never thought about that actually all the courses in Teachable are built on their platform, and therefore you can't really take them away.
Can't take them away.
Smart
You can't
Teachable.
bring things in, but Teachable has built a very large library and has a very great user base. And I think that's fine. As long as you don't have to move between platforms. SCORM's unnecessary unless you need two different e-learning applications to play nicely together.
Yes.
If you're only playing in one big environment, SCORM's likely not the thing.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So, okay, we have this last question before we go on to the publishing piece, and I don't know if I understand this question correctly. It was from Rick. It says, I've always been tempted to do SCORM compliant e-learning in PowerPoint or Excel because it seems possible.
Yeah. My response is that SCORM's expectation is that those type of materials will be played in a modern active web browser session. And so PowerPoint to SCORM conversion exists. At SCORM.com, we've built a helpful guide that helps you find the right tool for the job. There are a bunch of authoring tools out there that can change a PPT to a SCORM package because PowerPoint really fits well into the SCORM dynamic. iSpring Pro used to kind of build their value on that. I think that's great. Candidly, I think it's really easy to just copy and paste assets out of a PowerPoint and into an authoring tool in a way that gives you more control than just have these static slides, but that's great. When it comes to Excel, that's a whole other ballgame. Excel isn't well suited to SCORM, in my opinion. You certainly can't link it to the Excel executable application. Maybe there's a world if you have this web-hosted Microsoft Office thing where you could munge Excel into a SCORM course, but I think you're leaving the reservation at that point. Okay. It's got to be something that's easily played in a web browser for it to work really well.
So, I suggest build it out in PowerPoint, get a free trial of something for 30 days and build it out in there, whatever's native. Yeah, cool. Thank you. Oh, I was like, what? Really? You can actually do that. And yeah, totally. The iSpring suites and even Articulate Presenter, right? That was all those plugins for PowerPoint. Cool. Mm-hmm.
I think there's one last question we skipped here. Would there ever be something other than SCORM, XAPI, AICC, and compliance norms? I just wonder how we design for future grassroots changes and any of these changing, thus impacting tools. It's a great question. I think that is a fear that's healthy to have, but kind of unfounded. E-learning standards come and go all the time, and they move at glacial speeds. I really wish that they came faster. If you want to keep your finger on that pulse, I think it's great. There is a lot of work coming out of IEEE right now to help normalize XAPI, and we're watching that really closely. Here at Rustici, they do the standardizations for things like USB and a lot of industry standards so that plugs fit in sockets a certain way. IEEE is an interoperability group, and it makes a lot of sense for them to take a close look at e-learning standards and hopefully adopt a lot of what's going on there. Mm-hmm. That said, anytime you're debating by committee in that way, I have no ability to call that type of stuff. I don't know how that works. So we're participating in that as much as we can. We're tracking that closely as much as we can. I think IMS does some really great things. The IMS Consortium, we're paid members of that organization, and they have standards like LTI, QTI, Common Cartridge, Caliper. They're doing amazing work, and I'm always excited by what they're doing. They play really heavily in the K through 12 space for the most part, college as well. That said, watching what Rustici Software is doing is always kind of a good method. The core of our business every day is helping people play nicely, and we're going to gravitate to whatever tools people agree are the best. So I don't think I'd be worrying too much day to day, and understand that there's such a groundswell with SCORM. There's such a large library of content and courses that corporations use that if you play in that big pile, if something were to change, we're going to have to figure out how to reformat that stuff in a way that makes sense and doesn't drastically change the world. So we're already doing that. I can translate a SCORM course on the fly, play it as SCORM, and then just track it as XAPI for customers that need to make that migration. So if you use something niche and on its own without a lot of attention, I think you've got some risk of it going away or not being useful. But if you play in the mainstream, you can focus on building really excellent courses, really excellent content, knowing that, hey, if we ever need to change this stuff, you are one of many with that pain. And when you share pain with a lot of people, we'll go solve it broadly. So that's kind of my opinion there.
Cool. Okay. And thanks for catching that question. I just didn't number it or something.
That's all right.
And it's really important. Yay, 2 minds are better than 1. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen now and just show you my, where are we? Here we go. There. So this is Articulate Rise. And I just, the courses in Articulate Rise, I think are very good. Like, I'm just going to let you walk me through it, but they really, I mean, it's linear, right? There is some interlinking, but it's very much a linear type course. So basically a linear progression through a bunch of topics, and that's all these are. And they have just embedded multimedia. So very simple, all text and GIF based, funny GIFs. So I'm going to go to export, and there's my export type. So we have the LMS. We have other things, which I've tried and they work. They're fun. But as far as LMS, so I've got all these different options here.
That's right.
Do SCORM 2004 AICC XAPI, which has in quotes or brackets tin can. For those who understand what that means. So so walk me through these options and when I should be really thinking about using each one. Like, what's the question I should ask that would be like, that's de facto, I should be using that.
So I think for almost everybody building the type of course that you just quickly showed us, SCORM 1.2 is the default answer and the right answer.
Okay.
SCORM 2004 will be useful in 2 ways. Okay. If you have built a course that is nonlinear, that has sequencing and navigational rules, SCORM 2004 is how you must save it in order for that behavior to come into play. It may also be useful in SCORM 2004 if you've built some really interactive fill-in-the-blank or essay questions. Back to that, I don't know it off the top of my head, but SCORM 2004 gives you a bigger bucket per question to put characters into. Okay. That is a technical reason why you should use SCORM 2004. Beyond that, the only other way I could see you needing SCORM 2004 is if the client's RFP mandates it. A lot of times people writing the RFPs don't fully understand what they're asking for, and they look at SCORM and say, what's the latest? Let's give it as SCORM 2004. Give your customer what they want. But moreover, you're not going to notice much of a difference between SCORM 1.2 and SCORM 2004 with respect to what I see on the screen here, unless you need those 2 things.
So would you say, and I don't know if you're intimately familiar with this, but let's say I'm building a branching scenario in branch track. Would that be a 2004 or would that be still a 1.2?
So there would be some under the hood details inside Articulate that I'm not well versed on. It's been a minute since I've built an e-learning course myself. I would encourage you to test. We provide a free testing sandbox that we'll talk about in a minute. Yeah. And that is where, I don't know, I would save it as 1.2 and see what it does, and I'd save it as SCORM 2004 and see what it does.
Cool.
Our website at scorm.com says, ask us anything really, and we mean that. And so if you start to get into that type of branching and need a little help, support at scorm.com is going to go to Joe or Ryan Donnelly. They're brothers, and these are the type of questions we answer for free all the time. So rather than let me guess, ask the guys that actually know.
That's awesome. And I really appreciate that. I think people will now be way more willing to ask questions now that they know how friendly Rustici is over there. Yeah. Okay, so now when I choose 2004, then this addition button comes up. I don't know.
Right. So this answer will be most dependent on what the LMS can support. because each one of these different editions has to have a different runtime environment, a different player. So it's almost like the VCR battle had Betamax and VCR and HD DVD versus Blu-ray. These different editions matter that much. Most LMSs support some flavor of third or fourth edition. But I would ask the LMS which edition they support in order to target that. There are some technical details between third and fourth that probably aren't interesting in the context of this discussion. And if you really get into those weeds, ask us anything, really. We'll tell you which one to use in the right time.
Okay. So, so the difference between, let's say, if I picked a second edition and the LMS uses a third edition, what the difference might be that, you said those 4 criteria that are being the outputs, it might be that I'm only getting one, or because I put it in the wrong format?
That's right. So there's a lot of LMSs out there with a player running our SCORM engine behind the scenes that doesn't care. It's agnostic. You can upload any form of 1.2, 2004, second, third, or fourth, and it's going to handle them all, and no one has to worry. But there are plenty of LMSs out there that don't support them all well. And you have to know specifically which edition it's expecting in order to make it go.
Okay. Cool. So everybody needs to do that little bit of homework to make sure that their package, and also like we talked about, the idea of that backward design is whatever you want that experience to be, you have to figure out how it's going to be packaged so that it optimizes that experience.
That's right.
And even if you're not a part of the publish. Okay, cool. So I think that explains that. And then what is AICC?
AICC is a really cool standard. It was originally created by the aviation industry. Its stewardship has been transferred over to ADL now, so ADL is the keeper of it. It's been sunset for the most part. I feel comfortable saying that.
That's a very gentle.
I work in a really pedantic world, and there may in fact be AICC things going on that I'm just not aware of sitting here at my desk. But ultimately, it really is elegant with what's known as the cross-domain browser security restrictions problem. AICC was intended to be easier to remote host a package and can just connect to an LMS is the fastest way to explain it.
Okay.
There have since been industry solutions that handle that even more elegantly than AICC did. You might bump into it from time to time with a specific customer asking for a specific thing, but it's really achieving parity with SCORM 1.2. It's a package that can move between platforms, play and track roughly the same way. There's not a whole lot of difference between their end result, even though technically they are very different standards.
So if I accidentally publish something as AICC, then it probably, will it work with things that accept SCORM 1.2?
No. The LMS must have its own AICC conformant runtime environment in order to take that. You are saving it as an entirely different format with entirely different guidance. And so it has to be compatible. I don't think AICC is an option for most. I think you should just use SCORM 1.2 if you have a choice between the two.
Yeah, that sounds, I mean, I don't even know what they put it there. Anyways, it's okay. And by the way, every time I do like a recording or podcast, either there's like a howling dog, so a truck's outside, or somebody grinds coffee. And I'm now always like,
Awesome.
Here's my coffee. So, okay, now we get to the juicy buzzword everybody's talking about, XAPI Tin Can. Yes.
So,
oh my gosh, look at this. I get a special identifier. Woo.
That's right. XAPI, also known as Tin Can make this package. If we're being pedantic, what this is going to create is a launch spec Tin Can API package following the 0.95 version of the specification.
That hurt my brain.
This is designed to achieve parity with SCORM. So we wanted something that the industry could grab onto and start to use immediately. If you have an environment that can play an XAPI package, this is the right option for you.
Okay.
Most of those environments also support SCORM 1.2, and I think that that's probably a better option for right now.
Mm-hmm.
I love XAPI. I love Tin Can. I think it's really powerful. This identifier helps you do some more complex structuring. And for the sake of this conversation, let's leave it at this is another package type. And your biggest limitation to using it will be a learning management system that knows how to import that tin can API launch spec zip file. You should check with your LMS administrator, see if they can handle that file. And if they can't, SCORM 1.2 is going to do the exact same thing without as much technical work. So it's probably the right case. Articulate's content is pretty linear. It fits really neatly into SCORM, and trying to do it for the sake of doing it in the new standard is going to create more headaches than you want to deal with right now, in my professional opinion.
Okay. So thank you for that. I think that a lot of us just, like you've mentioned, we see these different options and you think, what's the latest and greatest, without really considering, are we able to leverage all of these resources? Can we? There's so many pieces that need to work together
That's right.
to make this effective. Now, the way that this is set up here is that I can only use when I do this, like track using course completion.
Mm-hmm.
You said that there's 4 parameters really that SCORM kind of helps you to measure. So
Mm-hmm.
am I now, with this choice, am I just limiting that feedback that I can get from SCORM?
So SCORM's intent is to allow the instructional designer to choose what it means to attempt a course, to pass a course, to fail a course, to track time in the course.
Yeah.
And there are more detailed resources than me on this call to kind of walk you through the right time to do it. But Storyline can publish as a 1.2, or Articulate Rise can publish as a 1.2 that can do many different things. Mm-hmm. And I would encourage you to go into the user groups to really understand how you get the tracking you want. But cool. As you can see here on the screen, you're saying how much you must finish in order to be marked as complete. Mm-hmm. And I don't know enough about what you've built to say, but I would say because you didn't put an assessment in the course, that it's grayed out your other options because you're not actually asking questions there. But if you were to go back and build an interactive type of quiz or essay, you'd be able to do more.
There we go. Okay, that makes total sense. All right, so I did want to show everybody, like after I publish this baby and it generates basically a quiz or a zip file, right? Mm-hmm. As it does that, then I go over to this magical space. Did you want to share your screen and then show us around?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So, okay, cool. What we have here is called our SCORM Cloud, and it's a fantastic tool for instructional designers who want to quality check their work before they send it out into the world. So you can sign up for a free SCORM Cloud account. You and everyone you work with can have one. And it's become the de facto way to just see if a course plays and tracks the way that it should before delivering it to an LMS. Content that plays in a learning management system should play in SCORM Cloud exactly the same way. And so if you are ever delivering a course that doesn't play or doesn't track the way that you thought it should, putting it in SCORM Cloud is a neutral playground. If it plays and tracks in SCORM Cloud, it should be the same way everywhere else. And if it doesn't, ask us anything, really, and we'll help you figure out why. So once you're in SCORM Cloud, you click the Add Content button, hit Import Course, find the file from your Articulate, Storyline, Rise, Captivate, whatever you're using. Click the Import Course, and it will add it to your library. Oops. I've not put myself in the right realm. There we go. SCORM Cloud can have realms, so you can subdivide your projects and keep everybody separated.
Realms.
And essentially, once the course is in your library, we give you some options to come in here and play and track it. So we can click the launch button. This is the golf course. This is the most boring course on the internet, but we use it to benchmark and to test things. So it's just some simple rules of golf. We've cut it in every form of SCORM and AICC and XAPI you can imagine. We can answer some questions, and we can watch SCORM, score it, show you the individual answers, roll it up, and exit back. Okay. So If that happens in SCORM Cloud, it should happen the same way in any other LMS, and it helps us really understand where problems lie. If you're super technical and want to get into the weeds, this is called a debug log. This is one of the only places in the industry where you can actually watch the two-way communication between the course and the LMS. We've designed this to be pretty useful so that you can start getting into the weeds. We also have the decoder ring. So the Ovaltine decoder ring can show you, based on which version of SCORM you're using, what all of these different calls that you see in the debug log actually mean. And so if you're really wanting to understand the SCORM communication, hey, we've given you two tools right here that make it really easy to look under the hood and understand how the data flows back and forth. For the most part, you don't need to know this. And if you notice at the bottom, ask us anything really. You can share this debug log with us and we'll help you understand what's going on for free.
Why isn't that on your t-shirt?
We do have some cool t-shirts here at Rustici.
I bet you do.
A whole other conversation. We also have this magical box called course properties. And so this can really be useful for showing navigational bars. I'll just turn everything on for the sake of a demo. And we can also change the launch behavior so that if you felt like this course needs to be in a frame set, or if you want to kick it out to a new window with specific dimensions, we can do that too. And we can also change a ton of compatibility settings. So if you're ever in a situation where you're inheriting some SCORM content that you don't know much about, hey, that's not a problem. There's a little mouse over that'll show you what each one of these does. We can solve a lot of really complex SCORM problems without having to rewrite your course or change the LMS. And this is how we're able to do this magic, even down to forcing it way back into a different IE7 mode or something. You'll notice I've changed some things, and when I relaunch this course, I'm going to be able to now see it in a new window. I've added some buttons at the top. If you imagine having a course without a previous and next button, exiting would be super hard. You might lose data, so we can force that button into the learner's purview. There's a lot we can do here. It's not really worth going into too much detail on. We can also show some reports. We call it reportage. It's a word we made up, but we make it really easy to understand what's going on there. And finally, the last tool that I think is really interesting is that we can help you share. So if you don't have an LMS, or if you just want to put this course in front of a colleague, our invitations make it easy to email it directly to them or share a link. And we also have Dispatch, which will help us cheat our way into somebody else's LMS. Using Dispatch, you can essentially create a link between the course that you have in SCORM Cloud and another third-party LMS. So you'll notice I have one version of this course shared out with all of these different clients or learning management systems. And this allows us to essentially come in and control whether or not this course can be launched. It can be available to new learners or only returning users. There's a cap, there's an expiration date. And so if you're working with instructional designers who want to be able to own their intellectual property, even though the learners live in another LMS and the client might be asking for the full version of the course, I can help you enforce different licenses. I can help you play SCORM 2004 or XAPI content in a SCORM 1.2 only LMS. We've got a lot of tricks up our sleeves here to help you crawl, walk, and run. Test content, share content, manage content, and ask a lot of questions along the way. That's what we're here for.
That's awesome. So I'm just, if somebody had, let's say, this happens quite a bit. People invest in platforms. Let's say they're a large organization. They invested in a platform early on, let's say early 2000s. And now they're trying to move those things and maybe just augment them with some multimedia things, but they need to make all that work with new things. Is that something you would help with?
Potentially. I can certainly be a sage source of advice, and I would love to have that conversation to figure out what are you trying to do and maybe guide you to the right tool, right platform. SCORM Cloud's Dispatch is a way that we cheat our way around a million different issues that we run into. If I can get things working on SCORM Cloud, I can get them working in nearly any other LMS around the world. And so we have a lot of ways to think differently about some problems that not all learning management systems, authoring tools are even aware of at the end of the day. So if you find yourself in weird problems where your content doesn't play nicely in somebody else's environment, that's the right time to reach out, and we'll give you some sage advice about what to do.
Now I'm just thinking about, I really like this question that you ask, which is, what do you actually want to achieve?
Mm-hmm.
So tell me more about that. How do people go wrong? I don't know. Are you tight on time? Do you have to go?
We can keep going. Yeah, that's fine.
Cool. So just tell me that.
Yeah, it might be a little jaded. I've been the guy who answers all inbound questions, unless they're really technical, for a long time. Yeah. And often customers reach out saying, I specifically want to learn about this product. And often it's probably a result that we don't explain it well on our site or whatever. They don't actually need what they're asking for there. And so I think it's far easier to consider these technical, highly specific standards in the context of what are you actually trying to do than it is to argue about the finer points about one tool over another or pigeonhole ourselves down a path. And so that's the conversation that I start. What are your goals? You're an instructional designer. Okay, that tells me a lot about who you are and what you're trying to do. I have SCORM Driver, where you could be a developer and wrap a SCORM course by hand and do all types of really crazy things. But at the end of the day, the authoring tool is probably way easier to use and actually what you want. And so guiding you down my tool will scare people away when they just needed the right tool for the job. And so most of my job is just listening, asking a lot of questions about the end that's in mind, and helping people find the right path towards that solution.
When you think about those goals, like, could you, let's say, come up with, I know I'm putting you on the spot, let's say 3 diagnostic questions that somebody should ask themselves in relationship to their goal that would help them, even if they're at the storyboarding level, make better decisions?
Yeah, so does the content that I have, the multimedia, fit inside of a web browser? That's step number 1. What is the learning management system that I'm going to be sending this content to? Because if it supports no standards, you might be in their environment to author it. Yes. And that first question would still matter. And then 3, what type of reporting or results are management or the client expecting out of this thing? Knowing what you want to teach and the methods of multimedia that you want to use, the system that's going to be playing and tracking it, and what reports look like should help guide you towards how complicated this all needs to be.
Awesome. Those are great questions. I would have never thought of the first one, actually, to be honest. Is it playing in a web browser? Wow, that's weird. Okay.
I get a lot of folks that are doing exciting things with virtual reality and augmented reality. I get a lot of trainers that are doing blended learning, classroom-based learning, practicing CPR on dummies and things. And those immediately guide us down an entire path that's not SCORM, because none of those assets really are well suited to SCORM there. So, what are you using? What type of tools are you trying to use as you teach somebody can guide a lot of how do I get it to play nicely in these other systems, and what do they want to see relative to reports. That's
been so useful and so helpful. Right. So is there anything else that you think that people commonly make this mistake and you wish they would just stop and you could change the world in just one less thing?
The speaking I've been doing at like eLearning Guild and ATD and stuff lately has been stop adding these words to your RFP without understanding what you're asking for. And so that's the biggest thing here is, grabbing XAPI because it's the latest from ADL and putting it in your RFP can cost companies a lot of money. Because they're adding complexity to the system that didn't need to be there. They just want a PowerPoint type course to play in their LMS, and they told you XAPI when SCORM 1.2 would have done the job. So, don't automatically understand or assume you understand these standards. If it's simple and easy, SCORM 1.2's value is that it just works. If you're doing complicated and crazy things, XAPI is the right way to go. And I'm certainly the right guy to talk you through what that looks like and to look at the learning platforms that are going to absorb that and to understand the reports that are going to come out on the other side, because XAPI is profound and does some really cool things when deployed in the right way.
So my last question is, what kind of services do you guys offer? Like, I know that there are things that you definitely answer questions, and that's great. But if somebody needed that dedicated help, what are some things that you can help with?
So we're actually a product-based company. We do very little consulting. We sell products to help authoring tools and content creators save as SCORM. That drop-down that you saw inside Articulate, that's us. And so when you pick those, we do the technical bits to make sure that it publishes outright. If you have a learning platform that authenticates a user, manages content, and has reports, and you just want to be able to place SCORM in there, I can do that too. We have SCORM Engine and SCORM Cloud that can fill the need inside that learning platform. There are a lot of organizations around the world that say we don't need an LMS. We just need something that can play and track a SCORM course, because our employee portal, our intranet, our website can do everything else. Cool. I can help you add a SCORM player to that environment. And then in between, I have some products like Dispatch that we took a quick look at, Content Controller, which is its big brother. If you are an instructional designer and you want to be able to license your content, remotely update it, track usage, continuously improve, like no one answered question 3 correctly ever in the world. Have we taught that wrong, or have we marked the wrong answer as correct? You don't get that type of insight as an instructional designer when you're just handing somebody the full version of your SCORM course. And so I can help authoring tools and authoring environments. I can help learning management systems and people who need to play content. And I can help people in between that want better control and better ownership of their intellectual property.
So if you are, let's say, a developer and you'd like to be able to create, let's say, compliance courses and then farm them out, let's say, to different organizations, then this would be a great place to keep that
absolutely.
Without having to invest in like some giant LMS repository. Okay, wow.
That's right.
That's awesome.
And you're using our player. We host it. We've become really good at playing e-learning content. We're launching millions of courses a month through the SCORM Cloud, and we've got a laundry list of really great clients using our tools behind the scenes. So the first step, though, is talking to us. Let us know what you're working on, what your goals are, and we can align you with the right off-the-shelf products or the things that we might be able to offer, or some custom solutions for developers. It's very common. Somebody gets told, hey, go implement SCORM, and we're the first place they come. No one wants to do that anymore. That's what we do.
Wow. Well, I learned a lot. Even that stat you said about the Army publishing like every day more courses than some organizations do in like a year. I can't wrap my mind around that, but they are big beasts. So.
Yeah, that's right.
And innovators, I guess, innovators as well.
Absolutely. They're solving really hard problems every day. And so, ADL's work over the years has drastically changed the e-learning industry for the better. And we work really closely with ADL, and they're doing amazing work even as we speak. So we'll continue to watch that stuff. And if we need to help e-learning companies play nicely with one another, we're a pretty good first stop, because it's the core of our business. It's the only thing we worry about all day. We do nothing else. And so if that's really what you want to talk about, we're great. That's fun.
Thank you so much. So if people want to basically learn more or get in touch, you recommend?
info@scorm.com. It'll come straight to me or Andy, who sits across the hall. We'll handle you. We'll talk to you. We'll help find the right tools for the right job. That's what we're here for.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for this talk
No problem.
today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
You're listening to the E-Learning Scenario Design Podcast with Anna Zabramowitz.